How are you guys doing tonight? Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I know it's a Thursday night, kind of late, but I want to thank you. I want to, before we get started, also wish my dad a happy birthday. He decided to come here tonight to listen to me, and so I'm thankful for that. So happy birthday. So I'm with the Yellow Ribbon Suicide Prevention Program. My name is Kelly. Yellow Ribbon has been implemented in schools throughout San Diego, and we seek to talk to students who might be struggling with depression or might be thinking about suicide. And our goal is to give them tools that you can use to seek help. As the youth and program coordinator of Yellow Ribbon, I'm very biased when I say that we are an effective program. But I've spoken to thousands of students around San Diego, and I know how powerful it can be to even say the word suicide or depression. Because let's face it, it's not something that we talk about. But if we want to prevent suicide, we have to be willing to do something about it. And to be willing to do something, we have to be willing to talk about it. And so that's why I'm here tonight, to talk to you guys about suicide prevention. And on a more personal note, I'm very happy to be here because I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder about 6 years ago. And so I know how hard the struggle can be to deal with not only depression, but mania. And I've used Yellow Ribbon, the tools that I've learned in the program have helped save my life. And so I want you guys to see what our program is about, know what it is, and I'm going to share some of my own personal story as we go along to show you how it has been effective not only in my life, but in other people's lives. So a little bit more about, sorry. Yes. Okay, thank you. So a little bit more about the Yellow Ribbon program, how we were started. We began in 1994 by Dale and Dara Emmy. They lost their son to suicide, and they decided from that, what can we do? What can we do to prevent suicide? His friends were asking, what can we do? And the program was founded, and I'll get to that a little bit more, but right now, Yellow Ribbon is in over 30 states in the US and is on over 5 continents in the world. So Yellow Ribbon, we've really grown since 1994. And our chapter in San Diego is definitely very active, and we reach out to as many students as we can each school year. So a little bit more about how it was started. This is Mike Emmy. This is Dale and Dara's son. Now in 1994, about 7 minutes before his parents got to the house, he died by suicide. And Mike was known in the town. He was always that person willing to lend a helping hand. There's a story of him helping this mother of 2 children. Their car broke down, and it was the middle of the night, and he drove to them and changed their tire and helped them get going. He also loves this Mustang, which is his yellow Mustang, and he was known as Mustang Mike. And he put off buying a transmission for his car so that he could afford 2 transmissions, one for his friend and one for himself. And so that just kind of shows what kind of person Mike was. And so when Mike died by suicide, it really hit the community hard. And his friends asked his parents, well, what can we do? What can we do to not only celebrate Mike's life, but make sure this never happens again? And that's when Dar said to them, what you need to do is never do this. Never commit suicide, never die by suicide. And never be afraid to ask for help. And so the day of his funeral, a few of Mike's friends got together, and they put together these cards. And these cards, which we now use as an ask for help card, carried the message that if somebody needed help, all they needed to do was to take this card to someone and to just ask for help. And it was that card that started it all, because those students, or those friends of his, sent out these cards all over the US to their friends and their family. And Dar got a call one day from a woman in Wyoming. And the woman said, I just had a student come to me and use this card. And that's how Yellow Ribbon started. It was started by teens for teens. And that own message rings pretty true to my story of how I got involved in Yellow Ribbon. So from the time I was growing up, I was a student athlete. I was also enrolled in all honors and AP classes. I was even my school's peer counseling president. I was the girl in class always cracking jokes, and I got in trouble for it a lot of times, but I was always there to try and make my friends laugh. And on the softball field, I was the girl. If my friend had a tough play, I would be there to pick them up and tell them they get it next time. On the outside, I was this happy model student. But on the inside, what I didn't let people see, what I didn't want people to see, was that I was struggling with depression. And I felt like I was struggling on my own, with it on my own. And every day after school, after practice, I would go home and I would just lock myself in my room. Because it was so much easier to just isolate myself. Because every day I had to go to school and put on this positive face and pretend that everything was okay. But it wasn't. And it got so bad, my depression got to the point where I started to hurt myself. And I was ashamed and I was embarrassed and I didn't know what to do. And it was my senior year of high school that I went to a presentation. It was by Yellow Ribbon. And the presenter said the words, suicide, depression. Said these out loud. And that was the first time I'd ever heard anybody talking about it. Anybody being willing to say those things. And the other thing they said to me was that it's okay to ask for help. And I took that message. I was relieved. I was empowered. I wanted to take this program to my high school. And so I did. I went the next day and I talked to my peer counseling advisor. And I said, I want to bring Yellow Ribbon to our school. And so for a week, I worked with the ASB and the principal and brought flyers and posters and made sure every person on campus received an Ask for Help card. And for a week, people were talking about it, people that I'd never met before, where I heard them saying things about suicide or about depression. And each time that I did, I felt more and more okay with the idea of asking for help. And that's why I'm still with Yellow Ribbon today, because I know that education, being willing to start that conversation about this touchy subject, is the first step we can take in preventing it. Now I know we all want to pretend that things are fine, but sometimes there are mornings where we just don't want to get up, or we're dealing with depression, or we're dealing with mania. And I just want you guys to know that it's okay to ask for help. Yellow Ribbon, we may be focused on teenagers, but it can be a program that can be used by anybody. And so I hope that what you can take from this presentation is not just more of a willingness to talk about it, but you can learn what are some of the signs, what are some of the things that I can see either myself or a friend, so that we can get help. I told you at the beginning that there were two training curriculums that we focus on with Yellow Ribbon. There's the Be a Link program, and these are both just trainings that we do in schools. So the Be a Link, before we go into any school, we talk to the teachers, and we talk to the staff and the principal, and we let them know, all right, this is what we're going to be talking about. These are things that you can look out for, because we are relying on teachers and counselors to be who those students go to and talk to. So we want them to be prepared, not only with what are the warning signs, but giving them the resources so they know where to go if they have a student that comes to them. And our Ask for Help program, this is what we show to the students. We show either a PowerPoint presentation in a classroom setting, or we do live presentations. And both of these programs are used as ways to introduce to the staff and to the students what is Yellow Ribbon, what are these warning signs that we're going to be looking out for. And so what is the goal of training? What is the goal of me being here today? Well, what we make clear to the students when we go and we talk to them is that we're not training anybody to be a counselor or a therapist or to even solve everybody's problems. But what we are asking is that you be a link, so that if somebody does come to you and they need help, you know where to go and you can get them that help immediately. And the best defense we have, the first line, is to be educated, to know what are the warning signs, what are the risk factors, and what are some protective factors, things that we can help cope with stress so that it doesn't lead to depression. So these are all things that we focus on in the training. Now, a lot of you would be surprised to find out that in this last year, 38,000 Americans died by suicide. Of those 38,000, 5,000 were youths between the ages of 10 to 25. Now, for each one of those deaths, there were 100 to 200 attempts. And it's Thursday night, so it's kind of late in the week, but I'll do the math for you. That is 500,000 to 1 million attempts by young people each year. And the importance of understanding these attempts is that for every attempt that goes unnoticed or unaddressed, increases the risk for future suicides. So it's something that we need to be paying attention to. Now, suicide is the number 2 cause of death for college-age students, or college-age youth. I'm careful not to say students because this is a tough time for anyone that's that age. You know, you're moving out for the first time, you're having to find new friends, you might be starting college, you might be starting a new job. All of these things can be very stressful. And so it's important that if we know someone that is this age, to give them that extra support because it is a troubling time. And one of the scarier statistics is that the fastest growing age group for suicides is 10 to 14-year-olds. Now, in each presentation, I ask the students to raise their hands if they know someone, whether it's a younger brother or a younger sister or a cousin or a neighbor, that is in 5th through 8th grade. And almost every student raises their hands. And so that's important to know because suicide can affect anyone. And it's not just the students that we're talking to, but we're talking to their relatives, and we want them to be prepared. We want them to know what to look out for so that they can help these younger students, because 5th through 8th grade, it's hard to believe, but these students are in so much pain, and the only way that they think to end that pain is through suicide. And so we need to be talking about this. This is an issue, and it's something that is very important. So again, what are some more of the goals of training? I've said a lot that we need to know what are the warning signs and the risk factors and the protective factors. But we also need to know, when is it effective to do this type of training? You know, yes, we want to prevent suicide, but it's important that we also do it in a post-vention time or after the suicide has happened. And I want you to be able to talk if you have children or you know any children. How can you start that conversation? How can you talk about this issue? Because it is an issue that a lot of us would love to just keep far away from us, but it is something that we need to be talking about. And so I know that I threw a lot of numbers at you. So I'm going to give you more of a visual of how is suicide affecting us. How is it affecting San Diego in particular? Well, this chart shows the leading causes of non-natural death in San Diego County. Now in the orange you'll see motor vehicle accidents, in the green you'll see drug and alcohol overdoses, and in yellow you'll see suicide. Now there's a lot of yellow on this screen. And from the time we grow up, what are we told? We're told to, whenever you get in the car, wear your seatbelt. Or students are taught from early on, don't do drugs. Right. So we're being taught to always wear our seatbelt. We're being taught not to do drugs. But when are we being taught about suicide prevention? When are we being taught about this issue? And I want you to know this chart goes to 5. There's 5 leading causes. But suicide does not fall below the first, second, or third leading cause of non-natural death. So this is something that we need to be talking about and we need to be paying attention to. Now I'm going to ask you some true or false questions. So if you think it's true, just give me a thumbs up, and if you think it's false, a thumbs down. So talking about suicide will cause somebody to attempt it. Thumbs down, right, great. It's false, because people in crisis need to be talking about it. Because when you are in crisis, or when you are feeling depressed, or when you are feeling really alone and hopeless, you need someone to help you open that door to start the conversation, to be willing to talk about it with you. Because I know in my life, I've had to deal with thoughts of suicide. And I don't always know where to turn to or who to ask for help. But if someone were willing to talk to me about it, if they were willing to ask me that question, are you thinking about suicide? Are you depressed? Can we get help? That would be so much easier. And so that's what we need to be willing to do, is to be willing to have that conversation and be willing to talk about it. Now, true or false, friends can do something to help in a suicidal crisis. Thumbs up, definitely. This is one of the main messages of our program, is that friends can help. Friends are a big support. And how many of you in here know CPR? A lot of you. So you know that if someone is having a hard time breathing, or they're choking and you have to resuscitate them with CPR, you know, you're not solving all their problems, right? You're just stabilizing them until somebody else can get them the help they need. And so that's what we're trying to teach these kids, is that they can perform that emotional CPR. They can be there to stabilize their friend, to listen to their friend and stay with them, but ultimately we want them to get that help that they need. And so that's a big part of our program. Now, I said earlier that postvention is just as important as prevention. It is prevention. Because in a postvention time, especially 15 to 19-year-olds, the risk of suicide increases 2 to 4 times. And this is because of what we call copycat or contagion. So students that see this other student's suicide don't know how to respond, don't know how to deal with the stress that they're going through. And so it's important that we are there in that postvention time. And we just talked about talking about suicide does not cause it to happen. Me saying the word suicide does not plant it in anybody's head. If somebody is thinking about suicide, that idea is already there, right? So what you're doing by talking about it, by saying the word, is that you're opening that door for safe communication. Now, people who attempt suicide often tell someone of their intent. This is completely true. 75% of people who have attempted suicide showed some sign that something was going on, that they were thinking about suicide. So you can see it, and we're going to teach you today what are those things that you can look for. A really important thing to stress is that people that are looking to die by suicide or to attempt, they're not looking to do that because they want to die. It's because they want to end the pain. And I know that when you get really hopeless or when you are feeling really down and depressed, it just seems like that pain is never going to stop. And so you look for all these ways, and sometimes suicide just comes up as one of the answers. But it's not about wanting to die. It's about wanting to end that pain. Now, there's also a strong link between alcohol and drug use and suicide. In over 50% of people who have attempted, they were on some form of drugs or alcohol. Now, what happens when we drink? That part of our brain that's telling us, don't do it, kind of gets quiet, right? And that part of our brain that's going, do it, that impulsive part of our brain increases. And so, yes, in over 50% of the cases of those who have attempted, drugs or alcohol is a big deal. And not just that, but when you add together alcohol, which is a depressant, with somebody who's already depressed, it's a very violent mix. It's a very bad combination. And so we need to be aware that if we see someone increasing their use of drugs or alcohol, we have to pay attention to that, and we have to be willing to check in with them. I said, though, that suicide is not about wanting to die, it's about wanting to end the pain. But where does that pain go? Does that pain just disappear? No, it gets passed on to all the other people in our life. So it could be our parents, our grandparents, our friends, our coworkers. Overall, 236 people are directly affected by that one death. But this list doesn't include everything, right? I mean, the person could have been on a sports team, and there's another 20 people. So it's not just this number of people that's directly affected, it's more than that. And that pain just gets shared by them. It doesn't disappear. So, as I said, I've been talking about warning signs and risk factors and protective factors, but what are these? So risk factors are things that might make life more difficult to cope with. This could be someone going through a breakup, or a divorce, or having trouble with money. And then there are warning signs, which are observable cues or things that we can see in someone to let us know that something is going on. Now, this might be something like a change in their appearance. It might be a change in their personality. These are all things that we have to tune into and trust our instincts that we are seeing those cues. And lastly is protective factors, or things that can make it so we can deal with that stress, so that it doesn't lead to depression. And there are a variety of ways that we can do this. And one of the most important tools that we give in this program is our Ask for Help card, which is a big protective factor, and we'll get to that, but that's something that we'll be talking about. So what are these observable cues? What are these things that we can see? Well, there are 3 immediate danger signs that if you see, you absolutely cannot ignore. So if you know someone that's talking about killing themselves, or they're looking for the ways to kill themselves, whether it's firearms or pills or any other thing, or if they are talking or writing about death or suicide, these are things that you have to get help for immediately. And they're just things that you cannot ignore. Now, there are other signs, there are other things that we might see that might just seem like a part of growing up, or might seem like a part of getting older. Personality change. So you might know someone that was once the life of the party, always cracking jokes, always entertaining, and now suddenly they're withdrawn. Or you might have known someone that you hung out with them every day, or you always had a time that you spend with them, and suddenly they're not wanting to do it anymore. I know that for me in high school, this was a big deal. It was really important that I went home every day because I was just exhausted from having to put on this positive face. And so for me, withdrawing was a big deal. Another thing is acting recklessly. Now, when we act recklessly, we make decisions that we just don't think, this isn't going to affect me. Or if I do this, it's not going to be that big a problem because it doesn't matter. I don't care about myself that much anymore. So in teens, we might see this where they might start hanging out with an older crowd of people. Or they might start conversations with the wrong people online. These are all behaviors that we have to be paying attention to, because if they're not making good decisions, if they're not caring about what happens to them, then we have to pay attention and check in with them. Now, another sign that you might see is somebody who is always complaining about their stomach ache or their head hurting. Because we know that depression affects not only what we're thinking or what we're feeling, but how our body is functioning. So physical symptoms like a stomach ache or a headache might be an indication that something is going on. And one of the big ones that we really stress to the students is if you have a friend that is giving away prized possessions. This is kind of like an adult who is putting together their will or putting their affairs in order. So they're trying to give the things they care about to the people they care about. And we really stress this to teens because they're going to see that before anybody else, before any parents or adults in their lives. So it's really important to pay attention. It just doesn't seem right all the time if somebody is suddenly giving you their surfboard or their iPod, things that they really love. And so this is a big sign that we need to be paying attention to. And one of the big signs to look for is increased use of drugs or alcohol. As I said, it lowers your inhibitions and increases your impulses. And a lot of times people drink because they're trying to self-medicate. They're trying to make their problems go away by drinking. But the truth is, those problems are still going to be there. And so it's not an effective way to cope with stress or to make problems go away. And I know that when I am depressed, one of my things is I sleep a lot. Or I have a hard time sleeping if I'm manic. So these are my own cues that I can see in myself to let me know that, okay, if I'm not sleeping well, that might be an indication that something's going on. It might be an indication that my bipolar is acting up somehow. So this is not only a sign for depression, but for bipolar as well. And one of the big things also is dramatic mood changes. Now these could be somebody that suddenly was always very calm and now they're very active and energetic, but it can also be the opposite. It could be that somebody was very energetic and now they're very calm all of a sudden. And when we see this, when we see that somebody is suddenly very calm, it might indicate that they've come to some decision. They've made some decision about suicide or something like that, and now they're just kind of the calm before the storm type of idea. And we all know that depression isn't always just being sad or moping around. A lot of times, someone can be very agitated or anxious. And so these are also things that we need to be paying attention to. I told you that one of the immediate danger signs that if you see that if somebody is talking about killing themselves, that you have to get help immediately. Now, they're not always going to come out to you, right, and say, oh, I'm going to kill myself, or I wish I were dead. And oftentimes when we hear these statements, we don't want to believe what they're saying. We don't take them seriously because we don't want to believe that anybody is that sad, that that's how they're going to deal with it. But always take that statement seriously. If somebody is talking about killing themselves, always take it seriously. Now they might be more indirect about their cues, like nobody needs me, or don't worry, you won't have to be around me much longer. Never be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? Because, like I said, saying that word is not going to plant the idea in anybody's head. It's going to open that door for safe communication. And you have to be willing to take that step. You have to be willing to ask them that. So if they say something, either directly or indirectly, always take them seriously and always be willing to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? Now moving on to risk factors. And I always like to think about risk factors. Imagine that you had a big jar and you had a pile of rocks and you're just loading these rocks into the jar. What's going to happen eventually to that jar? It's going to break, it's going to overflow, right? Well, risk factors are like those rocks. The more things that we try to shove into the jar that stress us out, the more likely it's going to overflow and it's going to lead to depression or stress. And so one of those big things is trauma or loss. So when we lose somebody, or we've gone through a breakup, or even if we've lost a pet, we lose something that was so stable in our lives, and it was so constant, and now it's suddenly gone. That can really rock our world when we have to deal with, now it's gone. It's not going to be there anymore. One of the big things that we stress to kids too is that a lot of students, or a lot of people, know what it's like to go home to a family that's always fighting, or to a family that's struggling with money. And these can all be stressful things that make life a little bit more harder to deal with. And when you're in school, there are a lot of pressures. Pressure to get your homework done, pressure to get tests, pressure to fit in. And it's not always just one type of student that is struggling with these issues. It can be anybody. Like I told you in my story, I was always in those AP classes. I was always an athlete. I was the peer counseling president. Though that's pressure too. And so it's not just some students that are pressured, but it's everybody. Everybody can be going through a hard time, and everybody has things that stress them out or make their life more difficult to cope with. One of the big ones about being a student is being bullied. And being bullied doesn't just happen on the schoolyard anymore. Most kids are dialed into Facebook. And so when they go home, they're not worried about what somebody said at school. They're worried about what someone just posted. And now it's not just a handful of people that have seen it, but 100 people. And so it seems a lot like you just can't escape it. And there's a lot of discrimination going on. One of the groups that's discriminated against the most are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth who don't feel that they have that support from their family or their friends or their community or religious institution. But regardless of race or gender or sexual orientation, discrimination must not be tolerated. It's not one thing to say that I'm not a racist because I don't say racist things. I must not let racist things be said in my presence. And what we encourage students to do, what we encourage everyone to do, is to stand up. If you see someone getting made fun of, or you see someone being picked on for whatever reason it is, it's time to be an upstander, or someone that sees something that's going on and does something about it. And that's one of the big things that we stress to students. And one of the biggest risk factors is depression. Now I know a lot of us have probably heard people say to you, oh, you're depressed, why can't you just snap out of it or get over it? Well, I'll tell you, when I am feeling depressed, I look at myself in the mirror and I yell those things at myself. Get over it, snap out of it. But depression doesn't work like that. Depression is an illness of the brain. And our brain is one of the most important organs of our body that's in charge not just of what we're thinking and what we're feeling, but how our body is functioning. And I know what it's like. I struggle every day with knowing that I have bipolar disorder. And I know that I'm probably going to be on medications for a long part of my life. And that's a really hard reality to accept. That's something that I struggle with every day. But what I tell myself is bipolar disorder is like having diabetes or a heart disorder. If I take care of it, if I take my medications, if I know what my own symptoms are, then it doesn't have to run my life. And the good news is that over 80% of cases of depression can be successfully treated. Now I know that with bipolar that's a different statistic, but it's the same thing. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to check in with ourselves. We need to know, okay, if I'm not sleeping, that means something. If I'm not eating the same, that means something. If my thoughts are all over the place, that means something. And I need to check in with myself and be willing to confront, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna be on medications, but that's just something that I need to take care of, just like a person with diabetes has to take insulin. Now, I told you that one of the best protective factors that we offer students is the Ask for Help card. I'm going to read this message out loud. It carries the message that there are those who care and will help. If you are in need and don't know how to ask for help, take this card to a counselor, teacher, clergy, doctor, parent, or friend and say, I need to use my yellow ribbon. Now, the front of this card is important for two reasons. The first reason is that it's important is because it gives the person the permission to ask for help. I know that when we're struggling with stuff and we don't think that anybody's going to understand our problems, this card lets you know that you always have that permission to ask for help. And the second thing that it does is it gives the words to ask for help. Now, we may have read books or seen movies or heard songs that talk about depression. But a lot of us would have a really hard time going up to even our best friend and saying, I'm depressed. I'm thinking about suicide. I need help. But that's what the front of the card does. And it's not just a suicide prevention card. The word suicide only appears once on this whole card. It's an ask for help card. So you can use it at any time. Whenever you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or things are just too much, you can use this card. Now, on the back of the card, it gives directions to the person receiving the card. And the first direction is to stay with the person. Now, at the beginning of the presentation, I showed you a picture of Mustang Mike. Now, the night that Mike died by suicide, he called a few of his friends. And he got on the phone with one of his friends, and he was saying, I'm really depressed. I need your help. Can we just talk? Can you listen to me? And the person on the other end said, you know what? I have a test tomorrow. I'm really stressed out. Is there any way that we can just talk about this tomorrow? And they hung up the phone, and tomorrow never came. So when somebody gives you the card, it's important that you stay with them. And it might mean that you have to do something else later, like you have to do the chores later, wash the dishes later. It might mean that you're on the phone with them until 3 in the morning. But the important part is that you stay with them. Now, the second direction is to listen, to really listen. There's an old saying that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we will listen twice as much as we speak. Let's face it, a lot of us are pretty bad at listening, right? If you're at work and you see a coworker and you ask them how they're doing, what do they normally say back to you? Good, great, fine. But how many of us have had 365 good, great, or fine days? Not many of us, right? And so it's important that we listen not only to what they're telling us, but how they're telling us, and to really listen to what they have to say. Now, the third and most important direction is to call for help or get help immediately. I told you, we're not training anybody to be a counselor or a therapist. What we are asking is that in that moment, they perform emotional CPR and get their friends the help, that they be that link. Without friends being links for each other and getting them to the help, a lot of people don't get the help that they need. And in the yellow box in the card, you'll see 2 numbers, and these are Access and Crisis Line numbers, both for San Diego and National. Now, these numbers can be called 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But what the number that you're not going to find on this card is an expiration date, because it doesn't expire. And a lot of people think that, oh, this issue is never going to affect me. This is not something that I'm ever going to have to deal with. But I ask each and every student to do me a favor and to put that card somewhere safe. Because when I was in college, I was in a crisis situation. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call. I didn't know what friend to turn to. Then I remembered that I had this card in my wallet. And I pulled it out, and I called that number. And the person on the other end of the line saved my life. So a lot of people don't think that it's ever going to affect them. But I never thought that I would have to use this card. I started this program in my high school. I gave these cards out to tons of kids all around my school. But I still thought, I'll never need it. And so it's an important tool that we can have, because a lot of times we don't have those words. And students can take these cards to anyone on campus, any of the adults, and just give them that card without saying anything. And they know that they need help, and they get the help that they need. Now, one of the most important things about these cards, or if somebody does come to you and says that they're thinking about suicide, is to not to keep it a secret. Because your friend might be mad at you. They might never want to talk to you again. But isn't it better to lose that friendship than to lose a friend? And so it's important that we don't keep things like this a secret. It's a very deadly secret. Now, the second quote is about that story about Mike Emmy, who called his friend. And the friend, was stressed out with their own things. And so it's important that no matter what's going on in our lives, if we have somebody that comes to us, that tells us that they're depressed or that they're thinking about suicide, is that we take them seriously and we stay with them. Now, what are some of the other things that we can do to cope with our stress so that it doesn't lead to depression? Friends are definitely a very positive influence on our lives. Having that one person, I know that I have a friend that I'll see once a week. And I know that in that hour that we're together, she can talk to me about stuff, I can talk to her about stuff, and I just have that time to vent and be supportive of somebody else. And so that's very important to have in our lives. Other things to do, I love to laugh. Like I said, I make jokes a lot, and a lot of times they're not funny. But I try to make my friends laugh, and it makes me laugh, it makes me feel positive. Because if you even try, if you're in a bad mood and you just make yourself smile, if you force yourself to smile, you feel a little better, right? And that's the same thing about laughing, is having this positive energy. Another thing that I really like to do is to exercise. I try to run. I run about 3 or 4 miles a day. And just have that time to focus on running and breathing and feeling my body working. And all of these things release endorphins that make us feel better. So they're all positive things that can help us reduce that stress. And 3 of the most important things that we can do are to eat right, to sleep, and to exercise. When we have bipolar disorder, sleep can be one of the most important things that we have. Getting enough sleep, making sure that it doesn't exacerbate any of our symptoms or make us depressed or make us manic. Eating right. All these things, they seem so basic. But these are the first 3 things that we tend to forget about when we are feeling stressed or we are feeling overwhelmed. But they're the 3 things that we can fix first, and so they're the most important. And so, this might still be a very difficult topic for a lot of you. It might still make a lot of you uncomfortable that I even say the word suicide. But it's important that we be willing to get over that we be willing to say the word and talk about it. And if we know a kid that might be depressed, or just a kid in general, it's important to talk to them, to be willing to start that conversation with them. We encourage teachers and staff and adults and parents to talk to their friends, to talk to their kids, to ask them, do you know what the Yellow Ribbon program is? Tell them what you've learned, tell them what you know. And just don't be afraid to say the word. That's the most important thing, is if you're afraid to say the word, they're going to be afraid to say it. And so you need to be willing to talk about it. And like I said, one of the questions that you can't be afraid to ask is, are you thinking about suicide? I can't stress enough how much that if you say the word, you're not planting any idea. You're just opening that door for safe communication. And so what can you do to help? What can you do to prepare yourself for this conversation? Well, first, identify your resources. Know, on the table out there are plenty of resources to let you know about symptoms, about depression, about these things. Use them. Don't be afraid to use the access and crisis line numbers. Or 211 is also a good number. Another thing you can do is to identify a buddy. Have that friend that, okay, so they know that you're about to have that conversation. Check in with them after. Let them know how it went. Let them know what happened, what your kids said. Because it's not just about your kids getting your support, it's about you having the support as well. And a really important thing is to choose the appropriate time. You know, there are good times and there are bad times to start a conversation like this. If your kid is just coming home from school and they're rushing off to other things, it's probably not a good time to start this conversation. You know, think about doing it over dinner or after dinner, a time when you're all sitting down, when you're all having a conversation. Choose a time like that. And review the questions that you're going to talk about before. So know what you're going to say. Know what you're going to ask. Now I'm going to tell you a story that I tell all of the kids before I close up a presentation. And I think it's relevant to everybody, because even in a time when you might be getting all the treatment, or you might be talking to all the right people, or your therapist, or all these things, a lot of times it can be our friends or our support system that we really need to rely on. And so there's this boy, and he's walking down the street, and he's walking, and suddenly he falls into a hole. Now he looks up and he dusts himself off, and he stares up and he's at the bottom of this 10-foot hole with no way out. And so he starts yelling, and he's yelling and yelling. A minister walks by, and the boy yells, "Father, Father, please, can you help me? I'm stuck in this hole." And the minister looks down, and he pulls into his pocket, and he reaches out for a piece of paper. And he writes down a prayer for the boy, and he throws it to the boy. The boy picks it up, and he looks at it, but he's still stuck in this hole. And so he goes on yelling and yelling and yelling, and finally a doctor walks by, and he yells, "Doctor, please help me, I'm stuck in this hole and I don't know how to get out." Well, the doctor reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a prescription pad, and he writes down a prescription for the boy and throws it to him in the hole. Well, the boy picks it up, and now he's holding 2 pieces of paper, but he's still stuck in this hole. And so he goes on yelling for what seems like hours, when just by chance his friend walks by. And the boy looks up at his friend and yells, "Yo, you gotta help me, I'm stuck in this hole and I don't know how to get out." Well, without even thinking, the friend jumps into the hole with the boy. And the boy looks at his friend. "You idiot! What are you doing? Now we are both stuck in this hole." And the friend looks at the boy, and he says, "It's okay, because I've been down here before, and I know the way out." And so there are times, especially when we have bipolar disorder, that we struggle with this idea of always being on medications, or always having to be in therapy, or always having to watch out for the next episode that's coming. And we might be seeing the doctors, we might be on this medication, but sometimes the best thing that we can have is a friend that we can turn to, and that we can talk to in those hard situations. And that's one of the big points of Yellow Ribbon, is that friends are your first line of defense against suicide. And so it's important to keep people around you that can support you, and so can pull you out of that hole when you're feeling really down. So I want to thank you guys for being a great audience. I hope you guys have a great weekend. If you have any questions, I'll be here. Am I doing a Q&A? If anybody has any questions, I'll open it up to you guys now. Okay, well, great. Thank you again for, yes?
How do we get the cards to give to people that we think might be?
I have some in my car. I can run out to them if you're willing to wait for just a couple minutes
Oh, sure.
after the presentation. So if anybody wants any cards, I have plenty of them to give out. Yes.
Has there been any data on whether students actually use the cards and turn them into like counselors or parents? Do you have any way to kind of track that?
Yeah, well, we do track, we work hand in hand with the counselors at the school, and so we know every day as we're doing the presentations or after the presentations that students do come and they do use that card. And so it's a very powerful thing for teens to be hearing this message, and they do reach out, they do go to their teachers and their counselors. And we always make sure that if a student comes up and they're presenting that they are having these problems, that we link them immediately with the counselors, or we get them immediately to help that they can use, and to have somebody on campus that they know that can help them. So, and we also are working with a group that is doing research, that we hand out surveys after presentations, so then we get feedback on, okay, did they hear the message? Did they understand that these are warning signs and these are risk factors, and would they use it? And so we're getting a lot of positive results about that as well. So.
Do you, is this a high school focused program, or do you also give it in colleges, middle schools?
Yeah, I was just at City College yesterday, so we go and we do resource fairs and presentations and stuff for college age, high school, and middle school too. We like to reach out to those students, those 5th through 8th graders, because that is the fastest growing age group. So we do like to focus on all of those groups. Yeah.
Now, do you guys contact, like, in the school districts, do you reach out to the schools, or do you look for people to tell the school about you and have them contact you? What's the best way?
All means, actually. So a lot of times we'll have, parents that contact us and say, we want to get you guys involved with our school. And so then we contact the principal, or the principal contacts us, and so it's kind of a give and take, and we kind of find our way into each school. So, when I started in my high school, I kind of did it on my own, and I had to go through the principal and the ASB, and so, all routes, we welcome everything, all people that are wanting to get a hold of us and getting us in their community, so.
So churches and like Boy Scouts or any of that, you guys would
Yeah,
be
if they were to contact us, we would, be more than willing to talk and set up a time and get in there, so.
I'd just like to say a word. My name is Don Bell. I represent the International Bipolar Foundation. I'd like to thank you all for attending this wonderful, very moving talk. I just wanted to mention that we have a gala coming up. We have some handouts for May 11th, just to let you know. Also, if you check the website, you can find a lot of material, a lot of information, and also, in order to keep these lectures and our webinars going, there's a place where you can contribute if you feel that you'd like to International Bipolar. And again, I would like to thank you all for attending. I think this was, for all of us, very informative, very moving, and you did a great job of presenting.
Thank you. Thanks.